Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to, I guess, Code Talk Teach is the name we're going with. I am Kyle Cordes. We all work at Oasis Digital, and I guess we can go around the horn and introduce here. Lance?
Hi, I'm Lance Finney. I'm with Oasis Digital. I've been here for almost 4 years now.
I'm Zachary Kipping, also with Oasis Digital, like everyone else, pretty much. I've been here for about 6 years. So,
And I'm David
Anything
Moore.
other than your elapsed time?
I do software development and teach stuff. So yeah, although most of us do.
Great, great.
Yep. My name's David Moore. I also teach through Oasis Digital, consultant through Oasis Digital. Been a web developer for more years than I really want to count right now.
More years than I'm alive, maybe.
Probably not, but maybe close.
It's probably closer, yeah.
Probably since the beginning of the web, right?
Yeah, 90, between 90, yeah, about 97, 99.
The year I was born, so yeah, pretty close.
Yeah.
Yay.
Cool. Okay, well, so our kind of main topic for today, which I have no idea if it will garner much interest. We'll have to see how many views we get. We tend to get a small number of live viewers and more viewers afterward. But our main topic is actually keying off of the kind of big tech news of the last week and a half or two, that Stack Overflow, which I think probably all of us and everyone we know has used a million times, just sold for $1.8 billion, which Stack Overflow is great, but that's a lot of money. So that prompted us to want to talk about, like, how does this whole community site sharing of knowledge thing work? But as always, we warm up with a few sort of topics of the week in our kind of Angular, slightly Angular-centric, but kind of more broadly web dev world. Okay, so I guess one of the things going on is that Misko Hevery, was that the original? Was he the very first author of Angular?
Angularjs.
At least that's what he's known as.
And then, then I know that someone else joined the effort pretty early, but I believe he is the very, very first, which is great. He is at a new organization now and has started a new, I think Quick is the name of it, a new framework with a radically different approach to building apps, just completely focused on short time to interactive for pages, to basically load a microscopic amount of JavaScript and have the page come alive, like literally like a few K of JavaScript, and then the page starts working, and then be very incrementally load everything else to do all the other kinds of functionality you might want to do. Naturally, people are wondering, well, are you in production with Quick yet? No, we heard of it 4 days ago.
Right.
We're not training on Quick. We're not using Quick. We haven't built anything with Quick. We heard of it 4 days ago, but I'm actually pretty excited about it. I think it's it's sort of past time for some serious innovation in how these frameworks work, and heading in that direction of pre-render on the server and then populate just what you barely need to make your site come to life. That just seems so immensely valuable for all the kinds of sites where page load performance matters.
Yeah, I was going to say, it fills a particular niche, because like most of my clients that I've worked with, very enterprise level, maybe real time, data updates, etc. This doesn't necessarily fill that niche, but in terms of things like marketing websites, or where if it takes more than a second and a half to load, you've lost the user, Quick sounds like the perfect framework for that sort of interaction.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a negative thing about the enterprise dev world, but most enterprise app customers, from our experience working with, a whole lot of them, would probably put page load performance pretty far down their list of priorities.
Yep. I mean, those users are locked in and they have to use that application. So it's got to be rock solid and it's got to be easy to use, but it doesn't have to load fast.
Yeah. So I'm not looking for Quick to come in and become important in the spaces that Angular is currently very popular. But there are other segments where Angular is not very popular because it's really hard to make a complex page load, like that with Angular. I think it could really become popular in that kind of like e-commerce world. It could be.
I'm interested to see what the differences are between, like, say, PHP and Quick, because they kind of fill the same niche where PHP renders things as it's being served.
PHP has nothing whatever for like the client side of things.
Right.
Quick is kind of spans the client and server, I guess, in that sense. You write code which is server rendered for the initial state, and then just enough hooks are wired into it to keep going from there.
Yeah, I haven't dug into it enough yet. So
yeah, so I don't know. Maybe in a future episode we'll have dug into that. Okay, then our other interesting thing for the day was our friends at Narwhal were having some sort of event, which I don't think any of us made it to. But I've been following their stuff with great interest because one of our lines of business here at Oasis Digital is helping customers with Bazel. And Bazel is fantastic for scaled cloud building, but the barrier to entry for Bazel is quite substantial. It is a lot of complexity, a lot of tooling to absorb. If you're not currently doing scaled cloud builds, you'll look at it as, this is a tough to justify as much work. It seems to me like the Narwhal folks are sort of incrementally reinventing the parts you would need to do scaled cloud builds of front-end, full-stack, JavaScript, etc. apps in a way that is, I don't know, 10 times easier than Bazel to get up and running with.
Yeah, it's a lot more approachable.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could get to the point soon. They might already be. Again, we didn't attend today's announcements, where my build is too slow, and so you click a page and you key in your credit card number, and that allocates a bunch of stuff to make your build faster in a cloud somewhere, and money in, faster build out with almost no work. I think that would be really compelling. I think they're building that. I hope they keep building that. We'll probably help a whole bunch of customers use it if they do. Anybody else been following the NX? I mean, we're almost all of our enterprise projects are on NX, right?
I would say we're almost an Ngrx shop at this point.
Yeah, I know that when I've been using NX, just their local caching has drastically sped up things like linting and running unit tests. As I'm making changes on the same branch, huge speed ups there rather than running every single, like their affected is great, but then caching while running affected makes things immensely faster. And putting that as part of a CI builds, the affected steps as part of CI builds is also helpful for large projects, but like their cloud stuff where they're actually putting a cache as well, not just a local one, but one that is accessible not only to the CI build, but to local developers, that's huge. At least I hope it will be. I haven't dug into that yet either, so I'm very busy.
Well, I just added a link to the chat. As far as I know, it was just announced. I just saw a tweet that Narwhal is going to host a conference for just NX in September, and it's going to be a 2-day free conference with 2 days of paid workshops around it. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Perhaps some of us will participate. Maybe we'll even get on the stage. I have no idea, but it is interesting that they are working towards that. It's going to be free online only.
Yeah, I just saw the online. I was just hoping it was going to be in person.
Yeah,
I miss
it's
conferences.
hard.
I missed real conferences so much.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I'm supposed to speak at the Ngrx conference, which was going to be last November, and then it was going to be May of this year, then summer of this year. Now it's sometime next year, and I think they're just having to push it off because they really want it to be in person, and they just can't get the logistics together yet. So someday we'll get there with online conferences.
Yeah, I imagine we'll get everything nailed down just so with online conferences, right as we stop doing online conferences. That's been my assumption.
I'm definitely looking forward to when we can go back to some online conferences safely. And there's a certain amount of investment when you're at an online conference where most of your distractions are gone. Absolutely. And you can focus on the talks or focus on the hallway conversations and the hallways conversations don't even really happen on the online conferences. But like I was watching the Narwhal talk today, but I had it on one monitor and I was working on the other monitor. So I didn't catch everything that they were talking about. And that happens at online conferences for me all the time. Yeah. Go ahead.
Even if you can manage your own distractions, which is hard enough, if you're in an online conference, you're still accessible to everyone around you to distract you.
Yep. That's actually what I was just about to say is like I have taught classes in the past where they were online, but because they were also in the office, they'd get pulled away and miss an hour of the class and then try and have to catch up. And that's really hard to do.
Yep. We've absolutely seen that at many customer sites, that customers who arrange for a class to happen off-site, even if it's like, at a hotel's meeting facility 3 miles from their office, that they send a team over there just to spend the day with us on one of our topics, they get such a higher level of attention sustained versus those where they're in the office and somebody's running in, grabbing somebody every once an hour.
Yep. I think we've all had that.
Well, I guess we should get to our main topic because we're 12 minutes in. So, kind of going off the headline here. So, Stack Overflow. I started using Stack Overflow probably like, the day it was announced. Like whenever it became available and announced to the public, that's when I started using it. I used, the Experts Exchange before that, which was absolutely terrible. I used the other competing sites whose names, all the rest I've even forgotten. Stack Overflow was just such an immense improvement to the world when it happened. I think it really changed the way that people, shared knowledge about software online. And then, the path between then, what was it, at least 20 years ago, probably? No, probably less than that. And, getting to 1.8 today is quite a journey.
Yeah, when was Stack Overflow started?
I don't know. We can probably do some quick online.
Because I actually have a login to Stack Overflow, which is one of the things that they pushed early on, but now you don't. Sure. Like most people don't even need it anymore unless you want to post questions or vote. So
let me launch.
Actually posting questions.
September 2008, only 12 years ago. So I would have thought further than that.
Yeah, so I would have probably created the login because I had a question 8 years ago. But yeah, I've used it pretty much since the beginning through my Flash and Flex days for sure. There's always the meme / bad developer sort of take of Stack Overflow of copying and pasting code. But I've always viewed, if you are trying to solve a problem and you go there and you find that solution, if you're a good developer, yes, you can copy and paste it into your own stuff, but you're also going to learn why that works. And
heard the joke, right?
Yeah.
Which one? Code. Right. Did you copy the code from the questions or the answers?
Right. Yeah, it's something that's greatly helped me because up until Stack Overflow, finding ways to improve without like taking another college course or finding a book and with the pace that things move in our industry, finding a book that might be 3 years old by the time it comes into my hands, and it just came out on the bookshelf, sort of thing. Finding ways to improve was very, very difficult, and Stack Overflows and places like that, and forums really became one of the best places to kind of level up your developer skills.
Yeah, Stack Overflow specifically kind of jumped out ahead of all of the rest of those things, all the way, and just sort of basically took over that space of where are there questions and answers about all this programming stuff. And of course, a tremendous amount happened. They have this Stack Exchange network of similar sites that are not even related to computer software.
Yeah, they pretty much cover all topics nowadays.
They have an enormous job site, which I think is basically their revenue source. Anyway, but to get from there, even with all that in mind, $1.8 billion seems like a lot of money. And it's not exactly clear what Stack Overflow does that could make that much money. Like, how does whoever bought it get a return on that investment? It's not clear to me. I mean, I'm sure that the job site makes them some good money, but you got to do a lot of job posts to get $1 billion.
I mean, from what it looked like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like a company that had already invested in them like prior. So they were already kind of invested in everything that Stack Overflow does, and maybe it's just saying, hey, we're just gonna go the whole 9 yards and just kind of take more hands-on with it. But I don't know.
And this company, the company that bought them, is a company I truly had never heard of before this, but they own a bunch of other substantial internet things, although none anywhere near like the level of sort of common knowledge to the programming world of Stack Overflow. But they own Codecademy, who I think at one point, basically all of our arriving interns said they had learned from Codecademy, so they own that.
Udemy.
Go ahead.
Udemy,
yeah,
one.
Big one, right? They own. They have shares in a couple of the big, like Tencent and another big Chinese one I've forgotten of. Yeah,
huge, and it owns a bunch of other things.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just very interesting to see this thing that emerged out of this, software dev community. Now it's sort of up in the rare echelon of multi-billion-dollar things in the world. Anyway, so go ahead.
I'm just wondering. Yeah, like you, I'm kind of wondering how they're going to make back their investment. But I imagine they probably have at least a 5 or 10 year plan to make that investment back.
One assumes they have a plan.
Of course, there's always the saying of when you're not paying for a service, you are the service. So
you're the product.
You're the
if you're
product.
not paying for the product, you're the product.
Yeah. So, that's also probably the case here as well.
Maybe it'll end up, deeply plastered in advertisements on every side of every page, and have maybe instead of upvotes for the answers, you'll be able to have sponsored answers, and you for $1,000 a month, your product can be the featured answer to a question people have. I don't know. Who knows what may happen?
Start incorporating like meta rewards,
or they start.
There you go.
Promoting Stack Overflow for teams more.
Yeah.
Enterprise Stack Overflow, pretty much.
Although realistically, they have that. It's called Stack Overflow.
Like for internal systems, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. But like one reason why companies benefit from so much from Stack Overflow is that the people that work there go get answers that were created by people that don't work there. A Stack Overflow where your company has to pay for the creation of the answers is sort of like missing the point of Stack Overflow.
I mean, I would see like projects I have worked on, large projects I have worked on in the past, or things that have to do with workflows. A Stack Overflow, internal Stack Overflow would be really beneficial, but not beneficial at all for anybody outside. In fact, it could even hurt the company because it would give away trade secrets.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't want to have Q&A about internal systems on a public side, obviously.
Yep.
So any more comments on the acquisition before we jump off from there to talk about the broader topic?
I'll just say, having heard Jeff Atwood speak at BasilCon a couple years ago was a highlight. He's one of the founders of Stack Overflow, and he gave an entertaining talk about the HBO show Chernobyl, which I was not expecting at a Basel conference. So
he is a fascinating, very interesting person. Totally recommend following his blog, Coding Horrors. Although it's kind of become just his personal blog. It started out as Coding Horrors, tales, chunks of code from real companies, from real projects that make you really, really wince. There's some stuff in there like, oh no, please don't. Okay, so I thought we would use this Stack Overflow as a jumping off to talk about a whole bunch of kind of surrounding topics, all around the idea of how does knowledge, information, practices flow through our community of software development. And of course, I wrote in the kind of the notes anybody can see on YouTube, or we have an internal document about kind of different axes to think about there, but that's not like a strict prescription. So I guess I'll pick the first one, and maybe we'll just see where to go from there. So one thing I wanted to bring up is the idea of knowledge that you get ahead of time versus knowledge you get just in time at the point of need. And so long before 2008 when Stack Overflow emerged, in the 1990s, a lot of the community of practice, the sharing of knowledge and techniques was in paper books. Like David, like you were saying, like the lag, publishing houses, especially those that are not working in fast-changing fields, think nothing of there being like a 2-year delay, just kind of waiting to getting around to publishing a thing. That's a long time in a fast-changing. Oh, look at this! Oh, fantastic! This is probably where Lance learned Java. That's a seriously thick book.
I have a C# one of those.
So, in the 1990s, or maybe even the 1980s, one would go to a bookstore and then go to one of the most expensive parts of the bookstore and eagerly spend $50, which was a lot more money in 1990 than it is now, on a big thick pile of paper, and then read it and try to learn the thing. And there was absolutely no community in the sense of back and forth. Of course, there were the beginnings of online then, but still, the vast majority of knowledge was shared by reading books and magazine articles and such. And that's of course highly ahead of time, right? It doesn't do much good to go look for a book at the moment you're having a problem. Then with Stack Overflow at the other extreme, type in the exact problem you're having and see if there is a well-written, upvoted exact answer to that question. Anyway, that's...
Yeah, if I wanted to learn how to think about Angular, Stack Overflow would not be the place I would go to. Something like Angular Bootcamp or one of our competitors' training courses, something like that would be what I would look at, or maybe a book or
the docs.
NG book, the docs, a larger integrated thing. But yesterday, I ran into a problem where I was having trouble with an Angular material component showing the wrong date because of time zones, and figuring out how to use moment to get that right. I would never have learned that from a general purpose course, a 3-day course, a 500-page book, because that's just too detailed. But Stack Overflow was the perfect place because other people had run into that very specific problem. So it's kind of a, Stack Overflow is not a place I would look for general issues or strategic thinking, but for tactics, for specific issues, oh yeah, it's the spot.
Yeah. Learning things like best practices or application architecture or anything like that, Stack Overflow is not the best place to do it at. I'm sure there are some places that have answers to specific questions about those topics, but learning about that topic in general, places like Stack Overflow just don't work. When I wanted to, early on in my career, when I wanted to learn about a new technology, I would go and talk, or I would go to, and this was back then, I would go to the bookstore, find the section, see if there was a book there about the topics that I wanted to learn about. And yeah, it was $50, $60 books back then, as thick as the Java book that Lance held up earlier, and try and go through that. There was there was a really good O'Reilly book on ActionScript that really got me, that helped me learn about object-oriented programming and ActionScript and everything like that back then. It was really good. But if I want to learn more just-in-time stuff, and I don't necessarily have the internet available, I've worked at a couple of different places like Oasis and other places like that where we've had a team working on a variety of projects, and I'd be able to reach out and talk with those people about that. And if they didn't have the answer, we could at least talk through the answer and come up with a solution at that point.
I was trying to find my oldest tech book that was still on my active bookshelf in my home office. And I want to see what year this one is from. But yeah, let me see here.
I mean, I got rid of my Perl book a long time ago.
So
I have my dad's Fortran book from the 60s.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah.
So this is a pretty
Yeah.
good book.
Yeah.
It's from 2004. It's actually still pretty current, although many of the details that were used in examples would be pretty bad by today's standards, pretty far off.
Yeah, I mean, domain-driven design is still a thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of which, I printed out because I like reading on paper more than I like reading on screen. But they actually talk about domain-driven development in Enterprise Angular, about how to split up your really large app into different domains so that you can then split it up into micro front-end architecture pieces.
Which is a somewhat different topic than what this book is about, but yes.
Well, and I'll come up with a more recent example. This is a book that I bought a few years ago. It was written by someone I've seen speak at a couple conferences. And I recommend this in ABC classes. And I always tell them, I receive no kickback or anything like that. This is not a huge book. It's not like the, $50 Java book, but it really does teach a way to think about Angular and Ngrx.js. And this way of thinking is something that we wouldn't get from Stack Overflow. It's 200 pages of just kind of digging into an approach. And you're not going to get that on one page of Stack Overflow. So there still is usefulness in depth on this. I don't think they make a dead tree version of this book anymore. It's available a PDF to purchase from the publisher. But there are still times that things like this, a few hundred page in-depth look is still useful.
I find all this kind of interesting because, my take from, I guess, my generation, since I'm so, younger, pretty much all of us, I feel most of us that I kind of talk to, are either growing up with YouTube, blogs, I guess kind of documentation, but we kind of skim it, or just Discord or other random communities that 9 times out of 10, I haven't read a book in a while that's actually just for coding or for something like that. Maybe since I was in school, but that's just because they're trying to sell stuff. So yeah, it's kind of funny seeing all that where I wouldn't really know how to do, how to handle a book for learning something when I just kind of skim through blogs or skim through just Google, really.
Yeah,
trying to learn a concept or whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say I have some of those same sources that you do, but it's definitely, just because I've been working in this industry a long time does not mean that I know everything or I'm doing everything right.
Exactly.
We're all human. And so we all learn differently. YouTube is actually a really good resource. I have a hard time delving into it because I get distracted by other things.
Sure.
So I end up running it at 1.5 times speed just so that it keeps my interest and I can process it.
I do 2 times speed.
Yeah, but it is really useful. But I read faster than most YouTubes would go. So my default is going to read. And now
we're on YouTube right now, by the way.
Yeah, we are. What?
No
What?
factoring that, but
Yeah, and things like blogs are really important. They're not hosted individually anymore necessarily.
not really.
Although it seems to be going back to that. Medium was a big place that you would go to for a lot of stuff, and then they changed kind of how they worked, and then now people are leaving Medium and hosting stuff on their own again.
I don't understand why you would put anything on Medium. It's sort of like a way of saying, I really don't want that many people to read this. When people come to read my words, I want them to get some idiotic paywall for something I was trying to give away. I don't.
Right. Well, I think that's
minimum bar of entry, I guess.
yeah. I mean, that's part of. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's part of what I like. Originally, Medium would just let you in and let you read all that stuff, but now you do get the paywall, or you have to log in order to read an article. And I think that's why a lot of people are leaving.
Logging in to read an article seems. I can't even fathom why anybody would want to log in to read an article.
Well, and then also having that as your business model when you're catering to the people who know about incognito windows is an interesting approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because like people they circumvent it anyway. So anyway, it's blogs have not gone anywhere. I mean, I think there have been repeated attempts to replace blogs with somebody's walled garden. It's like, hey, if I could just capture all that value into this company instead of it being distributed among all these blogs, wouldn't that be great?
I would say, as a developer, I encourage every developer to have their own blog, not for anyone else, but for yourself, because myself, and I know at least one other developer that I've worked with before, a friend of mine, we'll write up an article of like, here's a really tough problem that we solved, or here's this really weird edge case that we ran into and how it got solved or how it got worked around, and we'll put it up there. And he's told me multiple times, it's like, hey, I was forgotten about this thing. I worked on this technology 3 years ago, and I was having this problem, and I Googled it, and the very first search result was my blog, and it was the answer I was looking for. So.
I mean, I've
Corey
got that
Ryland
beat by
says that a lot.
decades. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, Corey Ryland says that he gets that a lot. I have a blog that I used to put a lot of travel stuff on, and it was kind of dead. But within the last couple months, I've put a couple posts on with that very idea. We'll see if it goes anywhere. But like, I've kind of revived a blog that no one pays any attention to. So we'll see how I get anything out of it.
So, predating Google, there was a thing called Deja News, which Google eventually bought, which was a search engine over Usenet, which I know David knows what a Usenet is.
Yep.
Lance, do you know what a Usenet is?
Yep, all the rec groups.
Zachary, this is before you were born.
These are the hieroglyphics. Yeah, I don't know.
So, on
it was pre-web.
Yes. Oh yeah. On quite a few occasions, I would do a search, both when you just had when your Usenet client had a search, and then using Deja News, and find something and read it, and then get to the bottom, and like I was the one who wrote the answer to the question that I now had, and I would like search and find something I had written 5 years previously. Sort of like, how did that not, like, the information was clearly in my head long enough to type this. How did I forget? So I would definitely recommend writing good stuff on your own blog is obviously much smarter than just posting to some random online discussion group and hoping you find it later when you look. But yeah, this is a long known phenomenon.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now that stuff I did 2 weeks ago at work, I'll forget that. So you're talking about something like 3 years ago or Usenet days. Yeah, forget it. Yeah. I'll remember I did use Usenet.
Yeah, right. Low resolution knowledge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think so it seems like our first topic of ahead of time versus just in time definitely sparked a lot of conversation. So let's see what's next to spark the next round. Okay, so the next idea was intentional knowledge sharing or learning versus sort of osmotic is the word I wrote. And I'm sure there's some better, ambient might be a better word.
White noise.
Yeah, like learning something because you're sitting down for the purpose of study versus learning something just sort of as this accidental side effect of work you're doing for other reasons. But where does so we sell and teach a class where you go spend a few days very intentionally learning one of several topics. So that's obviously one extreme, right? Go get on a plane. I mean, until 10 years ago, last year, whatever, get on a plane, hopefully coming soon. go spend time in a room to pay attention to somebody, that's obviously at the far extreme of intentional learning.
Or even in just intentionally going, I want to learn more about this topic, and going to YouTube and finding a whole playlist of videos to watch for hours.
I would say Stack Overflow is kind of more on that, more at the intentional end of the scale. Although certainly it's kind of fun to go just browse Stack Overflow. I would assume that the most use of Stack Overflow is, I did a search because I'm having a problem, so I'm going to a page which I think is going to help me learn exactly what I need to solve this problem right now, which I think is what Lance was saying. He hits all the time, on even with Angular questions. What do we do that's at the other end, more sort of accidental learning along the way?
So I listen to a lot of Angular and other web dev podcasts, and so I don't always know what John Papa and Ward Bell are going to be talking about, or Frosty, or whoever the podcast host is. So sometimes I'm listening to things because I'm interested in the general topic, but there's a specific topic of the week that is something that I would never have investigated otherwise. But hey, it's in my ear holes, and so I learned a little bit about it.
A similar sort of case is how I learned about Storybook and doing pattern libraries and things like that, is just digging into there and hearing people talk about it. And it wasn't something that was even on my radar, but hearing about it, I realized it filled a niche and just got me in there and learning about it.
Yeah, I think podcasts have to be the epitome of that sort of ambient learning, right? Because you tune into a channel, you tune into somebody's podcast, you don't like necessarily pre-screen exactly what's going to be covered in each episode. Just like, oh, well, whatever's going to come out of this channel, I'm generally interested in. And then that knowledge turns out to be useful 6 months later, something you picked up.
Yep.
And as a side note on top of that, I watch like a lot of live streams. Like that's my generation kind of thing. We watch a lot of Twitch or whatever, right? So there's a decent, I wouldn't say huge, but a decently large-ish, I guess, community on Twitch for just web developers in general, like game developers, web developers, pretty much everything under that house. And it's nice to just throw up some stuff. It's like, I don't really do a lot of whatever type of development they might be doing, but it's still just like learning random stuff. People come in, ask questions, whatever, and it's kind of neat to see people like debate things back and forth, just like spur of the moment kind of. And then it's just kind of nice to hear that in the background or whatever, and then kind of osmotically, kind of what you mentioned, just kind of absorb that info.
Which again is what we're on right now.
Right, exactly.
Although I think that just numerically, a lot of live content is consumed much more like a podcast than it is live.
Sure.
Although that probably varies. There are probably some live shows that are only relevant to literally what's going on at that moment, and there'd be little point in doing a recording 3 weeks later.
And one thing this makes me think of is something that Bill Odom, who is on the project and works with me, had it as an idea a while ago that we haven't implemented, but it's still, I think about every once in a while, of just having us pair programming remotely, not necessarily to work on a specific issue, but just to watch how other people do their programming.
Yeah.
Because what I do, the combination of WebStorm and fork dev and command line that I do probably has a lot of neat little tricks that are completely different than my teammates do with different tools. And some people are going to be better at command line than me and vice versa. And just as we use our tools, we will learn things from each other, but then also just like the way we attack problems, we could learn things osmotically. We could be focusing on this specific Jira ticket, but along the way, we would learn a lot of other things too.
I've been programming for decades, and I still learn something interesting every time I work with somebody else on anything.
Yep. I mean, back in the Pleistocene when I was starting my career and saying, and as a designer, just like today's modern IDEs, Photoshop is a huge beast. You can't learn, Photoshop is kind of like the IDE for designers. IDEs are huge, and just watching someone else create shows you those different, like, oh, what was that tool you just used that would save me hours of time? I don't use command line Git anymore because I use the integrated Git that's in IntelliJ IDEA. And it took me a while, but what really kicked me into using it as opposed to like using source tree or command line Git was another friend of mine that I was working on the same project with. He was like, "Why don't you use this?" And it's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "How does it work?" And he showed me all the different ways that it worked and how much easier it would be. And basically, it's one less tool that I need to have. I don't need to install source tree or fork or any other third-party Git tool. I can just stay in the same IDE and use key commands and things like that to kick things off. And it's just really, really handy. I'll stay in the same window. But it wasn't without watching somebody else code that I wouldn't have dug into that unless it was intentionally, what don't I know about this IDE? Let me spend an hour and figure it out, which I have done as well. But those happen much less than talking with a fellow dev about how they code.
So I think both of these, all these ideas, and like even the more extreme version of sort of mob programming, which we've actually historically done quite a lot of mob programming. Maybe not quite in the formal way that like Llewellyn Falco describes it, but just the general idea of mob programming. We've done a tremendous amount of that over a decade here. I think that's some of the most powerful sort of learning by osmosis. And that's actually one of the things I think that we have been most negatively impacted by the last year and a half of mostly not being in rooms together. The pair programming you can still kind of pull off remotely with some effort. It's really hard to get mob programming to like work if you're not in the same room. So there's probably going to be like a shadow, a sense of, so for 1 year of lost mob programming, there'll be like 3 years where a lot more intentional learning is needed to learn things on the spot or to recover from not having learned those things that you would have learned ahead of time in an ambient way, having to pick up on the spot instead.
One of the things, since I was working remotely before the pandemic, luckily, there are a couple of things that I've done in the past that have helped. I'm not saying it's a direct one-to-one replacement. It's certainly not. But like we had one of my previous clients was using Microsoft Teams, and we were all on there. And one of the devs was like, "Hey, let's connect more often. I'm just going to open up a voice room and just hang out there and while we code." And so we 3, 4, 5 of us would jump in, and most of the time you just heard keys clacking. Occasionally there'd be some small talk back and forth, but then at some point it'd be like, "I've just ran into a problem. Is there anybody out there that can help?" And then we either pop open a screen share and look through it, or just talk through it. And sometimes the rubber duck debugging sort of thing of just saying the problem out loud does answer it, but at least those other people in the same room also understand what the problem was and what the answer was, so they also learned at that point as well. It's not a full substitute, but it definitely helps, and it also helps bring that team together socially.
We're actually looking at doing an experiment with that in some of our projects here. So that idea is very popular in the gamer world, where people routinely keep voice channels open continuously while sort of low-level collaborating over an extended period. And we're looking at trying that with some teams here. It's difficult. There are many difficulties, right? Like the sort of stereotypical gamer demographic probably has a different set of distractions and obstacles than a enterprise developer demographic does. So I don't know how well it'll translate, but I'm looking forward to seeing some results on that. That's more of that just like learning by osmosis, by making it easy to just like be in a shared space with other people.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't mention, which I think is important, is we weren't all working on the same portion of the project or even the same project.
Right.
You know, some of us were Java programmers, some of us were front end coders, some of us were database people, and all of those different viewpoints also helped answer some of those questions, or you know, every time even if I'm working in Angular, if I start learning something like we mentioned Quick earlier, or React or Vue, they have a different viewpoint of how things happen, you know, and like even a MySQL dev might have an answer for me as a front end dev, because it's not something that would necessarily occur to me, but it's something they use every day. And it's just a different paradigm of where things, how to answer different questions. You know, there's just a different pathway.
And I don't know if this is going to be.
Ahead.
Oh, being move on if you want.
No, go ahead.
I didn't know if it was going to be stretching it because this might fall into one of the other categories, but I know like retroactively kind of learning things osmotically too kind of can happen. And what I mean by that is more just like on the pull request front. Like if your team or whatever does a lot of pull requests, like I might be putting out code there that I think is the best solution. But like 2, 3, 4 other devs might pop in like, hey, why don't you try it this way, do it this way? Why are you doing it this way? Get like feedback, questions and answers and stuff like that, just kind of spontaneously, just looking at your code.
Yeah,
And it's kind of retroactive learning kind of to an extent.
I've been on a project where we had a new member of the team who had come in from other companies and had not really worked with other teams of Angular developers before. And this person said that she really enjoyed reading our PRs. And even when she wasn't doing other people's PRs, but just reading the comments that we gave in the PRs gave her a lot of information. And she was learning from us as the conversation we were having in the comments of the PRs, which I think is very cool that she did that. You know, it's not every personality will do that. Not everyone cares about that, but the fact that she did, that was awesome.
So related to that, I think one of the most powerful tools to kind of really become part of a project at a really core level is assuming you have the permissions to do so, which most people do on most projects at most companies. Just read the commits and PRs as they go past on the project you're working on. You will learn by osmosis so many things, and you'll ultimately kind of have your finger on the pulse of the project in a way that you probably couldn't, except by going and interviewing every person every week.
Yeah, I totally agree. Both Kyle and Lance both is like early in my career, I was the sole person on a very small team who knew what you know, who was basically coding or whatever, and I didn't have someone to go and talk to or someone to read their code. But as soon as I was on larger teams and was able to do that, my coding skills got much, much better because I saw all the different ways, both good and bad, to code things. You know, it's like, oh, that's really awesome. I see what that's doing. Oh, that's completely unreadable, but still works. But I would never want to code it like that because 6 months down the road, I don't want to come back and go, what the hell? You know, how do you read that? You know, what kind of hieroglyphics is this?
Yeah.
And you know, so yeah, it's hugely helpful to see how other people code, especially in a big project, because you get a huge variety of different types of code. You know, but like I said, both good and bad, and people can definitely learn from it.
So I guess I should kick off our next subtopic here, which is kind of the axis of internal versus external kind of technical community, sharing of knowledge, and so on. So my take on that is that too many people default to internal. They default to, well, I'll just learn and understand this literally just for me, the most internal. Or I'll do something and I'll share it with my 2 teammates who are working on this subsystem. Or I'll share it with my project. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of leverage to be gained by pushing your defaults as far as possible the other way. And we're actually living an example of that at this very moment. A lot of what we discuss here, if someone were to go back and just watch every episode of this, a lot of what we discuss here is stuff that we would like to talk about with each new Oasis Digital team member, to kind of become part of our team, to become part of the way we all think about things. And we thought about, well, we could do that internally, but if we just just be careful not to talk about anything customer specific. We respect NDAs to the extreme. The great bulk of what we want to talk about, we can actually talk about in a way that's fully external, published on a YouTube channel. So along that axis, right? I mean, we're trying to push way to one direction. Of course, most people at most companies never even have the opportunity to kind of speak outside that company. Many companies have, they have their work is so bound up with some important intellectual property that it's difficult. So there are reasons, but I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Internal versus external knowledge sharing. Would you rather go to a web page, or would you rather go to your neighbor down the cube row?
It depends on the question. If it's, like the example I gave earlier for the where there was something in Angular material that was just not behaving the way I expected, I'm fine with a Stack Overflow for that. Maybe one of my teammates would know that, but it's also pretty specialized, so I don't know if anyone would necessarily know it. But on a more architectural question, or is this code too clever for its own good question, then I want feedback from someone who has some of the same context, and I want to have that conversation. So it really depends how much context you need and how specific the issue is. I mean, some things you can look for a specific answer because it's that line of code, and some things just aren't.
That also kind of brings in the level of just straight up domain knowledge too, because obviously you can go and Google most things when it comes to web oriented programming stuff. But if you just need something domain oriented, I can't just Google that. I need to go talk to Jeff down the road or something and get his feedback. And oh yeah, this is how this system syncs with this system, and then here's how you kind of bring stuff together, do whatever with it, right? So there is a level of you have to do internal, at least for that kind of domain level stuff. But I keep everything else mostly external as much as possible, and then maybe bring it back internally. I go get that answer externally, then I bring it back in, maybe share it, rant about it on a Friday afternoon, whatever. But it usually ends up working out.
And this ties into that idea of maybe you have a blog and you put stuff on it, even if you're not a popular blogger with 5 million viewers, but even if only 10 people read it, you're sort of you're helping those 10 people instead of only helping maybe 2 people on your sub team. Yeah,
I'm from an age of the internet where just shouting into the void with no expectation of getting any sort of return, I'm fine with that. I'm actually exceedingly pleased. I've gotten a couple of things with some of the blog posts that I've put out where I've gotten a question back of hey, I'm tried this and it didn't quite work. Can you help me? And I've gone back and forth with that person and never heard from again. Don't know if I helped them at all or not, but obviously it reached somebody. But yeah, I'm not necessarily doing it for everyone out there, but if it still helps me years later, that helps. Or just the knowledge of someone drove by, read it, and it helped them, but I never hear about it, I'm fine with that too.
Kind of reminds me of something that I did recently that I don't even remember what the problem was, but I had searched for an answer and I found someone's blog who had an answer, but it was kind of a manual workaround. And then I kept looking and I found in the GitHub issues within Angular, someone said, this is actually the correct way to do it. And it was much more concise. And so because I had appreciated that blog post, I wrote a comment in there by the way, this is good, but here's another way to do it. And it was a 4-year-old blog post. I'm sure the author didn't even remember that they had it, but the author was quite appreciative of, hey, cool, thanks. And so there was this conversation on a blog of an author who I don't even know. But, I was giving back because they gave something and I found something better. I'm not saying I created it, but I found something better. So let's have that conversation.
So one of the challenges with external knowledge sharing is, depending on the project you're on, it can be sometimes quite tricky to find the generalized problem and solution to talk about outside the context of like the intellectual property of the thing you're working on. So you see, sometimes you see things on Stack Overflow, in fact, to connect back to the intro, where someone obviously copied an inappropriately large amount of their application into a Stack Overflow question. Now, we talk about this here, quite regularly, and so I don't think anyone at Oasis Digital has ever inappropriately copied any quantity of like customer code to the outside world. But I do know that in the industry, it is not unusual for that to happen. What sort of thoughts are worthwhile about how to get your question, your answer, your blog post separated out enough that it's not about your project, that it's about the technology generically? What are some ideas to do that? How do we do
Well,
that?
I was thinking about that earlier when you were saying that there's not really an advantage for an internal Stack Overflow. Because you're getting advice from other people, but that is an advantage of some sort of hosted Stack Overflow type thing. But you need to have a large enough company where you have a community where we can do that, or a company that has enough specific expertise in what you're looking at. Because someone working at a solo shop, or solo developer working at a shop that is not really a programming company like that, they're not going to have anything like that will be helpful. It's hard. It can be hard to extract out a problem in such a way that it actually is useful as a question. Although I have had the situation where in the process of extracting it out to something that was simple, I exposed the problem enough that I was able to figure out what was actually going on. Because just by, in order to be able to put it out there, I had to figure out which of the 15 variables and take them away. And I figured out what the one variable is. Now I can search that. Now I understand what the issue is.
It's difficult to isolate a problem without accidentally solving it along the way.
Yeah. It's kind of like turning the Stack Overflow into my rubber ducky.
Yeah, right. In the process of trying to craft the question, I answered it for myself.
Yeah, and with today's tooling, like at least with a lot of the CLIs out there for more than just Angular, it makes setting up those examples of the bug a lot easier than it used to be. You would either have to start fresh and just start coding to get up to the bug, or you'd have to do a giant copy and paste and then ruthlessly redact everything that could possibly be proprietary or client related. And I've run into that similar to Lance, where I've had a problem, and in the midst of trying to put together something, I've stood up a brand new project with Ngrx and Angular, and I start putting all this stuff together, and I'm like, wait a minute. This same exact command that's failing on the project is not failing here.
Yep.
Okay, time to pull up my favorite piece of software of Beyond Compare and do a diff between the two projects.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times for me, like I try and flip the problem completely on top of itself, where if I can, I actually just straight up start in like a stack blitz type thing. And I just make the most generic thing possible first to kind of get a proof of concept if I can. Like, obviously, sometimes you literally can't. But if I can in any way, just make a proof of concept or whatever, just in Stack Blitz. One, because I get away with the bugs. I can get it down to its core essence. And then also, two, just because it's kind of like almost like a blog for me. Like, I can take that, throw it inside my GitHub, and I have a reference to that now for pretty much ever. And if I ever say like, oh yeah, I need to do this, or need to make this type of component or set stuff up in a certain way, I have a reference to it, and I can use that across multiple projects or whatever, and then sprinkle in the domain level stuff that I need to once I pull it out of Stack Blitz.
I think there's like an important principle hiding behind all that. That if it is hugely difficult to extract the thing that's breaking, that's probably your software trying to tell you something really important,
Right.
that your software is not sufficiently modular.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that I think unfortunately there, I feel like there's a lot less focus now than there was in our industry 20 years ago on the kind of core values of what's good software, good modularity, high cohesion, low coupling, that kind of thing. That there are so many platform language tooling things to learn that there's maybe less bandwidth to learn like fundamental principles. But yeah, it is in fact really hard to extract a minimum breaking example out of most applications that I see, because there are so many pieces connected in so many ways that just no, it's impossible to pick up a piece and go put it over there and run it. I'm also a big fan of using StackBlitz for those, but StackBlitz only solves the problem of making it easier to get an IDE up and running. It doesn't do anything at all about how to actually extract a bug reproducing subset of your project, right? That's the exact same problem.
The benefit kind of comes by flipping it, I guess, where I'd start small almost.
You start
yeah,
from zero.
I'd start from zero. I'd start with StackBlitz pretty much, like for if I can.
An empty
and
project.
Then, empty project to create the proof of concept. And by doing that, like I kind of get a modular thing because it's kind of reusable or whatever. It's not coupled to anything.
That's
and then when I need to, I just plug in the domain stuff and then I can reference it whenever.
Yep.
It helps a lot. I've kind of been doing that a lot within the last half year to a year. So now my GitHub's just riddled with StackBlitz things, but
how many of them still run on current Angular or current React? Or
I did a
whatever.
large upgrade at one point to like at least Angular 11 or something, and then back when StackBlitz said, "Oh, you can export to GitHub," I did all that to make sure everything still kind of ran. A lot of my things are just small snippets, like maybe even just a small TypeScript thing with some RxJS in it. So a lot of those aren't too bad usually.
So regular host Paul Spears, who is not with us this week, he is going through a process of digging through all of his old examples that he had on separate StackBlitzes, separate GitHub repos, separate just like directory in his hard drive, and he's trying to like, take all the, he has some like React stuff too, but take all the Angular ones where this is most amenable and put them all in an NX workspace on GitHub. Of course, you could use that for your React stuff too, but it's not quite as idiomatic, right? If you walk up to a random Angular developer, there's a pretty good chance they're somewhat familiar with NX. If you walk up to a random React developer, it's highly unlikely they've ever heard of NX, just statistically. So I don't know, but maybe he'll go there with it also. Okay, well, our next prompt is kind of similar to the thing we started with, the idea of what is the merit of seeking an immediate answer versus trying to get a broad understanding? Like, under what conditions would you like go after just the quick hit versus go after really understanding the problem?
So like the copy paste versus like actually understanding the fundamentals of the problem and kind of solving it.
We all do both sometimes. Like what?
Yeah.
Why would we do one versus another? When would we do one versus another?
For me, a lot of times, like my quote-unquote copy pastes are usually just like I'm Googling something. I need to know the very specific property name of like some SaaS or whatever thing, or just how to do like a very specific thing on a documentation API, whatever. And then past that, it's usually more of a system of like getting my question crafted in a certain way where I find an answer that says, hey, usually most people are decent about it on Stack Overflow, but like, hey, here's kind of the major hits of why you should do this, why you shouldn't do this, kind of that kind of stuff. I appreciate those answers more than anything because you can actually kind of learn from them. So yeah, I don't know.
So yeah. I feel like where the project is matters.
Sure.
If you're early to middle of a project, getting a broad, deep, true understanding is super important. If you're kind of at the end of a project, you're just going to make,
quick
fix this one little thing, and then you're going to walk away because it's done. Then you probably want to bias more toward just getting an immediate, smallest workable answer to move on. I think maybe where your role in a project probably matters. If you're sort of an individual contributor only, you can probably more get away with just getting a point answer. If you either are or are aspiring to be a technical leader, you probably need to put a lot more energy into, really tracking down an understanding of how to get answers. An understanding of why something is true, not just, oh, I need to use this property, paste this in, and the problem goes away. What are some other factors in seeking a quick answer versus a deep
I
understanding?
also feel like it kind of depends on the type of, I guess, like person you are, like how you learn, how you do stuff. Because for me, like I can't leave just like a problem unanswered or whatever. Like I can't not understand why something works the way it does. Like with RxJS, for example, RxJS is very complicated, or it can be, and just like copy pasting a quick operator, doing something like that from Stack Overflow, like I can't do that. I gotta like mess with it, add tap operators, console log, do all the stuff to like actually understand why it's doing
Why
what
it doesn't work that way.
why it doesn't work, and then like actually get to the core essence of the problem.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you kind of build up a tool belt of stuff like, oh yeah, I know that fixes that problem, and I know why. It's kind of that gratification almost.
So just straight personality. Your personality might push you more toward go copy and paste an answer versus I really have to understand why.
Right.
Yeah, I think that actually makes the difference between like a not so good dev and a good dev. Is a not so good dev, and there are lots of reasons for not so good devs. Like they may not have time to really dig into the deeper issues, or they just may not care. There's all sorts of people out there, but like the copy and paste side of things gets the answer done and gets it done quickly so they can move on. And I think the better dev would be ones who are like, I may have to do this really quick time-wise, which is another reason why you do the immediate answer copy paste. Is I need to get this done so I can get it out the door so I can work on my next task, or so where we have a thing, everything is on fire, we need to fix it now. But the better dev is the one that goes, okay, I have a little breathing room right now. Why did that work? Why is this the answer? And digging into that and figuring that out. That's usually a lot of the way I work. Is I run into a problem, I'll try and search for a solution, I get it working, and then I go, okay, why was that the solution? Just to understand better, and usually that will come around and be helpful on future things. Is I'll run into that same exact problem again or something very similar to it, and I'll go, oh, okay, I ran into this before, and while that answer that I had before is not an exact fit, I know why it broke, and therefore I can craft the solution that is custom for this problem.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to this. The basic hypothesis, like that's what makes a person better at this job of developing. But I think even within a single person, there are still a wide variance, right? You can't go maximum depth on everything, or else your productivity would fall to almost zero.
Time is the enemy of all programmers.
Even the most talented, malicious developer has to choose somewhat wisely which problems to try to dig all the way down and which to just grab a quick answer and move on. So many hours in the day.
Yeah, there was Valve many years ago. They probably still have this sort of concept. The way they structure their company is kind of like a giant T. Each person has a broad range of surface knowledge, and then they will dig down and specialize in one thing. But if they're asked to do something else, they can go and do that at a surface level for a while, and maybe even start drilling down at that point. But that's kind of how I see a lot of devs is, there is the jack of all trades, master of none, but even those people have their specializations that they're really, really good at. And then they have a cursory knowledge of a lot of other things that they can delve into. Like I have a cursory knowledge of DevOps, but it's really helped me out in a lot of different projects that I've had of, you know, improving that project, improving the pipeline, et cetera, even though that wasn't my primary job.
So
Yeah, it's like
on the one
Kurt's-
hand, I'm 100% with you on the generalist thing. I'm all about being a generalist, kind of a generalist in the extreme. On the other hand, like if kind of like if you're giving career advice to a young up and coming developer, financially it probably pays a lot more to be a specialist at a small number of in-demand things than to be a generalist. So I'm not sure which advice to give on that.
It really depends on where you are in your career, and also like I have seen that flip-flop back and forth throughout my career in development. There was a big push for like, hey, everybody should know a little bit of everything, and then there's the everybody should be super specialized, and it's kind of swung back. That pendulum's kind of swung back onto the everyone should be a full stack developer.
Yeah, that's the big buzzword now, right?
Right.
Every customer, every project, every hiring company, like
but
full
as a
stack
brand,
is super popular buzzword now.
Yeah, but as a brand new dev, that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Like someone right out of high school or right out of college, that's really hard to be a good full stack developer. It might get you in the door, and that's maybe really all you need, because at that point, you don't need to be a full stack developer, because you're going to get stuck on one part of the project and you're going to become specialized in that thing.
Yeah.
And then you might get moved over to another part of the project and become specialized in that other thing. But it really depends on where you are, where the pendulum is in that, be specialized, be a generalist sort of thing. And I say be right about there in the middle.
Like full stack. Like how full is full stack, right? Like, do you have to get out the soldering iron to be full stack?
Yeah. Do you have to know MySQL and Java and front end development and the design, UI, UX?
So I did a lot of development in an era where kind of people were mostly expected to all be full stack, and full stack definitely included put together and manage the database all the way through the UI. Whereas now, when you see full stack in a job post, when you see full stack in a customer asking for assistance, there's a much greater chance that what's meant is front end and back end, in the sense of middle tier server layer, but not the data layer behind it. Now, some people do mean the data layer, but many do not include the data layer when they say they want some full stack.
Yeah. And there was, back when I think you were talking about it, front end development wasn't really that hard, because it was hand coded HTML with maybe a little JavaScript back then.
I'm actually talking about prior to HTML, but sure, yeah, we can.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
And then a lot of sites didn't have a database. One of the very first things I had, one of the very first jobs I had was something similar, a site similar to WebMD. It was all hand coded. We had, back when a million hits a month was an impressive feat. That's what we had.
Yeah.
But it was all hand coded, and we thought we had a couple of systems in place that would allow us to change the theme of the site, in about a week. Which
was very fast, right?
Which was very fast back then. But we had a database and some CGI scripts back then. And even then, not all of the devs on our project knew, like I didn't know Perl back then, but some of the other people did, but I did more of the design side of things, and they didn't know how to do that at all. So even back then, full stack, I could touch a lot of things. I could read Perl, but you wouldn't want me writing it. So I could theoretically still be considered full stack. But yeah, and nowadays there's just so much more to know. Site site creation is a lot more complex. It is totally possible to understand every single aspect of web development from the data layer all the way up through where it reaches the client. But the question is how much time do you as a human have to learn all of that?
Right, and will what you're learning even still be true by the time, like, even if you have 24 hours a day to just devote your life and give up sleep, by the time you catch up to full stack, for some definitions of full stack, you're too far behind.
Right. You can't be a specialist in everything, but you can certainly know a decent amount of lots of things.
Okay, so our next prompt is for knowledge sharing, technical community, online versus in person. And I'll note that as I say this, 3 of us are in the same city, and I guess if we had been a little more organized, we could have arranged to work in a kind of studio we have set up in our fancy new office with like fancy microphones and lighting and all the stuff you'd want to have, but we didn't.
That requires driving, so yeah.
We've actually, I think we've gotten in the habit of doing this way and found that it works quite well. I'm not sure that what we're doing here really works any better to be in person. So for at least this sort of collaboration amongst the 4 of us right now, I think online is pretty much just as good.
Let's say you don't get the struggle of like fitting everyone in the camera and like getting the aspect ratio and stuff like that correct. And yeah.
Yeah.
But even if we were all like we're not all on the same projects at the same time.
True.
I've had the benefit, I'm sure we all have, but have the benefit of everyone working in the same office, but on different projects, and being able to talk with people on different projects and getting answers and such, because we were probably working on similar technologies. But I've also been on everybody over this past year has had to learn how to work remotely. But there's some things about remote work, there's less distractions usually, at least from your office workers.
The age of your kids.
Depends on the age of your kids. If you have kids, if you
are
have
non-existent or they are old enough to be doing their own things, what you said is true.
Yeah.
For people whose are existent and in a lower age range, it is not true.
But you do lose some of that. Oh, I'm just going to walk over to someone's desk and ask them a question. Oftentimes there's a lag there. So you have to be more mindful about keeping a connection with the rest of your teams. And that's going back to what I had brought up before, that's where the open door policy sort of thing of like, let's open a chat room, or a voice room where you can just hang out and just be, and kind of be there socially, but then also have instant answers to questions. That works with some teams, especially if they're all working on similar projects.
So most of our kind of real projects have some kind of meeting cadence, as often as daily. Occasionally we get ones that are substantially more than daily, which gets tough to get much done. Some that are a lot less than that. But what we have found in projects that we run internally is that, some kind of like status meeting kind of thing, like once a week is good. But what pays off tremendously is a daily or a few times a week work session, not a get together to do a scrum ceremony, but a get together to, hey, let's talk about what everybody is working on right now and pick whichever one sounds the hardest and work on it together for a couple hours. And we have executed on that at Oasis Digital, both in person and online, because although, working online was new to a lot of people in 2020, it wasn't new to us. As a company, we have, a tremendous amount of experience over a couple of decades with distributed teams. I don't know. So I guess I was here for those, but you guys were here for varying amounts of it. How did you feel about what sort of additional data points did we get by having this big change in 2020 about online versus in-person collaboration?
For me, I feel like, I don't know, it kind of varies with client, I guess, just depending on the level of ceremony they might have. But I know I have had like kind of ceremony things like Scrum, essentially Agile, whatever. Um, and it's honestly nice sometimes if you can kind of break away from that and like if you can get away with it, depending on who you're with or whatever. And where kind of like our Scrum things or daily meetings or whatever end up just being like, hey, let's demo, let's show off what all we're working on, and then we can just talk about the problems we're facing, about those things, and it actually ends up becoming like kind of like that office vibe of, it's kind of like check-in, just see how you're doing, whatever. Obviously, we still have like all the stories and the tasks and things oriented with that work, but we can handle logistics of that outside of the meeting. Like that can just happen inside a chat, and let's deal with like, what are you doing? Is it going well? How's it looking? And get some feedback, get some questions answered, whatever, direct face to face over a camera, I guess, but it still helps a lot.
Lance, it looked like you were about to talk a moment ago.
Yeah, just different thoughts. I mean, the projects that we have tend to be not with clients who are local to us.
Right.
It's happened a couple times. Like when we have local clients, then they sometimes expect us to be in their offices. But when we have a client who's based in Louisiana or California or New York or wherever, they just don't. And then since they already are not expecting us to be co-located with them, they don't really necessarily expect us to be co-located with each other. And so it, in some level, because of the types of clients we have, the pandemic affected us less than it would have a lot of other companies, because we already had to figure out how to be, if not remote from each other, remote from most of our clients. There are times that I fond memories of some of the conversations that we would have on previous projects where even though the client was in a different state, the three of us were co-located together and we could really dig in on issues. And I haven't had that experience as much since then, with everything being online and all being separated. But it feels kind of like overall that's on the margins, that the majority of it doesn't really matter that much, whether we're all in our individual houses or a few of us are co-located in an office. But that's also our company, and our company is kind of weird.
Yeah, I think that there's a wide variance among just individuals, idiosyncratic variance among individuals in sort of tolerance for online meeting duration. Online, how many hours per week can a given person tolerate before they have this? Well, I guess the whole rest of the world discovered what they called Zoom fatigue, which is kind of irritating because this predates Zoom by decades. Zoom doesn't get to own the idea of getting fatigued in an online meeting. Sorry, Zoom. But yeah, people discovered that, you can't be being in an online thing all day is incredibly wearing. And so I think you do need to be careful how you allocate your online collaboration time to try to use it to its highest and most effective value, like you're saying, Lance. Of if your team can tolerate 2.3 hours per day before it starts getting too fatiguing, if you use some of that 2.3 hours to do the thing of you're sitting around working on a problem together, instead of letting all 2.3 hours be sucked into banal meetings, you will get way more return on the investment. And I think that we see variations across projects, in that some projects do a pretty good job of making high use of the non-fatigue time available, and others just burn it up to where there's just no appetite left for serious collaboration because everyone is already burned out.
Yeah, I've noticed in my years of working remotely that a lot of companies, a lot of places that do have a fair number of meetings try to group them all in one area of the day. And because context switching is a thing, and trying to get set up and break down from a meeting takes more time out of your day, more than just, it adds on to the meeting time. So having all the meetings, like if 2 or 3 happen to happen, clustering them as close together as possible, and then being done for the rest of the day, or putting them toward, I hate meetings at the end of the day, but closer to the end of the day, and then having a little time to wrap up after that, has been much more successful than, I'm just going to randomly schedule a meeting in the middle of the day, and one in the morning and another one in the afternoon. It removes a lot of that fatigue. So that's something I've noticed over my, I don't know how many years of remote work.
Yeah, that using the time wisely is both what do you use it for and how do you schedule it.
Mm-hmm.
So my meetings are disproportionately interviews, which means that they're scheduled by an online scheduling widget, which means they just sort of pepper my schedule whenever the applicants have time to slip in. So I don't have any great insights on this, but does anybody else have more thoughts on this idea of what is the right way to clump together or group or schedule collaboration so that you actually get, a lot of knowledge sharing instead of the time just getting burned up?
I've actually found during, I guess, more of the pandemic time, because it's where the majority of this come up. I've never enjoyed morning meetings more than I have during the pandemic. Just because, I don't know, this might just be me, because I'll get up a few hours before work starts and just be awake and actually ready to go. But once I hit those meetings, I hit the meetings fresh. I can actually contribute. I can do all the stuff I need, which is good because planning's good, at least for some of the meetings. And then past that, I just go and work on the rest of the day on development work, and it usually works out pretty well. I'm kind of unique in my case because my current client is very global. So my time zone, thankfully, it works out where all my stuff actually happens in the morning, and everyone else's usually happens the evenings or afternoons, because Europe versus US.
Yeah.
So I end up having 8, 9, 10 a.m. meetings, and then I'm done for the rest of the day. And then I can, take my lunch when I need to. I can do my development work when I need to, and it kind of works out. It's all front loaded pretty much, which works out pretty well for me, at least. I'm more of a morning person, I guess, but I guess it kind of depends on that type of person. Are you a morning person, afternoon, evening person, and where that kind of plays out with your meetings and where you're most kind of laser focused to an extent?
So David, you kind of answered part of the thing I asked, but already, Lance, what are your observations from the right way to schedule meetings to actually make good use of the time together?
Yeah, the project I'm currently on, is the only project I've been on during the pandemic, and we have people on 3 continents, and so we end up having meetings at pretty much any time. And I'd love it if I didn't have any meetings during lunch hour, but because we have 5 time zones to deal with, it's not everyone's lunch hour, and so it just doesn't work out. So there are so many other constraints that we don't get to optimize for that.
So I was hoping that the answers when I kicked off that question would be around being global, because it ties directly into the next topic on our list, which is asynchronous versus synchronous collaboration, knowledge sharing, and so on. Long before all of this, long before Zoom was founded, after Google was founded, but long before there was a Google Meet, at a previous company, I had a globally distributed team. And I didn't want to have meetings in the middle of the night, and neither did other team members. And so we got into a practice there of primarily asynchronous collaboration. And I have found that asynchronous collaboration is just an immensely powerful tool. It is most people can't pull it off. Asynchronous collaboration is simply beyond, there's this principle in business that in a competitive environment, sometimes if you push yourself to the edge of chaos, then your competition might fall off the edge of chaos trying to follow you. And I think that principle applies here, in that the ability to do asynchronous collaboration, like if you can develop that skill in yourself or in a team, the leverage is just tremendous. So we would do things. So this was in an era before we had fast enough internet connections to do things like this reasonably well. But like for a code review, we would just pop open a screen recorder and do a code review. And maybe a couple of us that happen to be sitting in the same office might sit at the computer and do the code review together, but the person or the team reading it might be in another time zone where like it would be super inconvenient for them to do the code review live. And so we would just chat about the code, and we had the tools reasonably optimized so that our recording would get auto-saved to a file on the hard drive. So all we had to do was go rename the file with kind of like the name of the branch that we were reviewing. And then just to date this well, we just have to, launch our FTP client and upload it to the FTP server. And then maybe mention it in the issue on the issue tracker, which might have actually been an early version of Jira, or maybe this might have been before Jira. But the point is that asynchronous was actually practical and doable before synchronous was even possible technologically. And asynchronous has this pretty tremendous advantage in dealing with global time zone type problems. But on the other hand, as far as I can tell from like a current sampling, watching discussion on Twitter to get the broad world, talking with people at conferences, looking across all of our numerous client projects at numerous organizations, many of which are pretty global, hardly anyone does asynchronous collaboration. It is almost unseen in our industry. I see David nodding most vigorously. I feel like David might have been, although not with me on the same project at the same company, might have been with me, at least in terms of way of thinking in the era I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What are our thoughts on this?
I've been there before, and I think like our async, you were talking about like Twitter and other things like that to kind of keep up with the community. Our async in that sense is the blog posts and Stack Overflow that we're talking about.
Yeah,
you have to create external stuff.
Yeah.
Internal stuff, nowadays we've got much better tools and like doing a pull request, you've got that can be and usually is very async, especially if you're dealing with a global client. You can make comments and then 6 hours later the dev comes back with an answer, that sort of thing. I think the tooling is definitely much better than it used to be, and is definitely something that can be used. The problems that I see happening with it is because being connected is so ubiquitous, it's super easy, like here in the US and working with a global client, if you have the any messaging or email or whatever hooked up to your phone, at 2 a.m, you may get an alert and, decide to answer. And, that is possible to do every so often, but it's also a really easy way to lead to burnout.
So it sounds like the phenomenon you're describing is basically tools. So even when we have tools that are well suited for asynchronous use, like a PR or an email, nonetheless, there's something culturally that makes us almost start to treat the asynchronous tools as if they were synchronous and have like I said, my phone does not beep overnight, so I've turned that off a long time ago. But yeah, I know what you're saying. So obviously, we never talk about any specific clients or anything on our show here. But so for the rest of us here, so thinking back across our clients as a group on average, many of which have been globally distributed over the last 10 years, what are our thoughts on why our customer projects tend to really not do nearly as much asynchronously, tend not to do like a video screencast code review? I'm pretty sure I haven't heard of anyone doing a video screencast code review on one of our client projects for many years.
Well, every month or so, when I have a specific feature that is user visible, I'll record the a 3 to 6 minute demo of that feature and email it to the people so that I can get UI feedback from them whenever they get their email back, get to the email.
Great.
Unfortunately, it's sometimes hard to actually get the feedback. It just depends on the people, depends upon what other meetings they have that week and all that. But it is a way that I can do an asynchronous knowledge sharing with the client without having to schedule a meeting and get everyone together at once.
Do you find that you send a video and then somebody schedules a meeting for it?
Like it can happen, not too much, but yeah. Fortunately, the response is usually an email. And speaking of email, I just put a comment in here. I just pasted in my my email signature. And so I saw someone had this on Twitter. No idea who it was, but because I have people who are working in multiple time zones, as I said, and because I'm the leader of the team and I'm always on my phone, so I can always get these things, I don't want to give the impression to the people who are working for me that just because I might send them a message at any point means that I expect them to be doing the same thing. If I send you a message at 10 o'clock because I happen to be awake and have an idea then, feel free not to respond. And so I put that in there to try to encourage people to live asynchronously.
I haven't put that in my email footer, which is a brilliant idea. But I've had that conversation with team members on projects many times. Things like, I chose to send you an email. I chose this because I know email is an asynchronous communication medium. It's on you if you're foolish enough to treat it as a synchronous communication medium and feel you have to email me back instantly. I would have called or instant messaged if I needed an instant answer.
I even consider instant message more async.
Yeah.
Especially depending upon the time of the day. And especially with this last year, it's even more so.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what those people are doing, that you're messaging. That may be their lunchtime. That they may be working on another project. They may be in a meeting. Who knows? And so I'm just patient. But I have had people that when I've messaged them on Instant Messenger, they're like, "Hey, yeah, I'm on vacation, but here's the answer that I think you need." It's like, just. It's okay. You can answer when you're back from vacation,
See, I do a tremendous amount compared to the average American of vacationing, but I very rarely am so fully on vacation that I don't catch up with my email for a half an hour. But there are people for whom work-life balance means they must have a strictly delineated time on their calendar of work and non-work. But then there are other people who are usually called integrators who just kind of do everything all at the same time. Because at the same time, I don't hesitate to go do something fun that I want to do for myself during the day. And I encourage other people to do the same. Hey, you might occasionally answer an email at night. If there's something cool you need to do and it's 2 p.m., just go do it.
Yeah, and for me, it depends on if I'm on vacation, it depends on the type of vacation.
Yeah.
If I'm hanging out at a relative's house and we're just kind of spending the week so the kids can play together, and I'm sitting there and I'm just watching TV with relatives, oh yeah, I'll email back. If I'm traipsing through Munich or going to a Colorado national park, no.
You won't get much signal in a national park most of the time, so that's not even a question.
Yeah.
Although I took a picture because this was, I'm trying to think, maybe 2012. I had a full bars of 4G standing on the rim of Crater Lake, and I was very impressed. I didn't have anything I needed to do with it. I was just amazed it worked.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, let's see. I think we're getting close to the end of our list, and we're getting close to when we want to wrap up. So let me see here. I inadvertently had a not invented here notion pasted on the list twice. I think we'll skip the formal versus on the job thing and make not invented here our last topic. So the idea here was it's kind of related to the internal and external knowledge sharing. One of the one of the big questions about how people figure things out is some people are very inclined when there's a problem to go figure out what does the world think of this problem? Like, what does the community figure out? Other people kind of see that as almost as like a failure. Like, oh, no, I want to solve this problem myself using first principles or using only the documentation. I kind of used to be in the second category, but I got burned so many times that now I basically assume that first principles will give me an elegant answer which doesn't work with the broken technology in front of me, and I assume the documentation answer will not reflect critical ways in which the documentation is wrong. So I now am almost entirely in the first category of I don't believe in not invented here. I want to go get all the answers that were not invented here and understand them. What do you guys think?
I generally follow a philosophy of like just try and solve it. Like not to like a crazy extent, because I kind of follow the thing of like if I have a problem, I'll spend X amount of time trying to solve it myself, trying to figure it out, understanding it. If I can't do that, maybe I go reach someone internally. If that still doesn't work, maybe go outside. And like there's kind of like a path I follow of figuring out things where
That's really smart.
usually it doesn't take more than X amount of time. It's kind of the thing like don't bang your head against the wall trying to figure out something yourself for like 2 hours. If
Or
you
have a
would go-
two-bang limit, right?
Yeah,
you bang your head
exactly,
against the
like-
wall twice, but then you go
like,
ask
I could have
somebody.
solved this problem by asking a question like 5 minutes in. So yeah, it definitely helps kind of like the efficiency of things go a lot better. Whereas like, I still learn some because I try to give it my best attempt as fast as I can. If that doesn't work, or I'm like, there's got to be a better way, then I start kind of reaching for outside resources or whatever as fast as I can as well.
Yeah, and this kind of goes between solving problems, but also like implementing features sometimes too. Usually it'll be like if I'm solving a problem, if it takes me more than 15 minutes to figure something out, that's when I start reaching out and trying to find other people that might help or other resources that might help. But at the same time, if I'm in a enterprise project or any project actually, and if I weigh the costs and the costs and benefits of, okay, we need to implement this feature and it's got this really complicated data grid. Do we want to write the data grid ourselves and support it and add features or make sure all those features are 100% good? Or do I reach out to a third party and just pull that library and just use it right out of the box?
Yeah.
And there is no one right answer. A lot of, I would say about 80% of the time it's pull it right out of the, get that third party library and use it right out of the box. But there are times when writing your own data grid is the right thing to do, because the out of the box data grid, you'd have to Frankenstein it so badly that it's not recognizable. In order to get it to do what you wanted to do, you might as well have just written it in the first place. Or it just doesn't have that many features and it's effectively an HTML table. But yeah, that's kind of lost the thread here. But it's, doing it yourself has a really satisfying feeling, but you're also trying to get stuff done. And so, you kind of have to weigh all the benefits and drawbacks of those things. And if you're trying to solve a problem, I'm with Zachary here of just like work on it until you've hit your head against the wall a couple of times, and when it hurts enough, go off. But I've also worked with people, and I was one of these people who've spent literal hours trying to solve something and then not being able to get it, and then go and talk to someone and they're like, oh yeah, do this, this, and this. And it's like a one-line change. And it's like, I just spent 2 hours trying to fix that problem. When if I'd gone out and said after 15 minutes and asked that question, I'd have been done in 15 minutes.
Yeah, the two things this makes me think of is one is part of the discussion I give during our Ngrx course about entity, because entity doesn't do anything that magical. Everything it does is something that you can do by yourselves with just the straight up Ngrx store, and that pretty much everyone has a bunch of times. But instead of writing that block of code yourself, those 10 lines of code a bunch of times in your own thing. Someone else has written it and tested it. And then you get to let them manage the unit tests and you don't have to do it. So I don't think that's exactly what Kyle was asking about, but that's really what it makes me think about, that you can let other people have solved the problems and you don't have to solve them all. And then with what David said at the end, reminds me of when I have a junior person on the team. Like, I remember from when I was a junior myself, and then when a junior person joins the team, trying to figure out that balance for myself, and then try to coach them in the balance that they should get between how hard should they work on their own and before they ask for help. Because you don't want a junior person to come ask for the answer for every question, but you don't want them to spin their wheels for 8 hours on something that you could have answered in 2 minutes. And figuring out which type of questions are you should really work at, or at least for 15 minutes, half an hour, and which type of questions, like, no, this is just, you would have never gotten this. It takes the experience. It's hard to know where that line is.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like when mentoring a younger dev, that's when I teach them about rubber duck debugging as well. Like, hey, if you spent, 5, 10, 15 minutes on a problem and you haven't done it, then do the rubber duck debugging and say your problem out loud and try it and see if that gives you the answer. Because a lot of times it will. And if that still doesn't work, if you still don't have the answer at that point, then come see me, or then go reach out to somebody to get some help. And that's where I've usually found a good balance. But yeah, like, you definitely don't want someone spending an hour on the same problem, especially as a junior dev who's still learning, when they may not. It may take them a year of actual experience to know the answer to that. And then, so usually I say somewhere between 15 minutes to a half an hour working on a problem, then go seek out the answer. I was definitely that junior dev who would, especially when I was starting to learn Adobe Flex, who would hit a problem and then immediately go and ask for an answer. And the people that I work with one of the guys that I worked with at that point was like, okay, he kind of sat me down and said, you need to work on this for a little while and try and figure this out. Dig into the documentation. He gave me tools. He actually did mentor me. He didn't just say, don't come to me for questions, because that's not helpful either.
No.
But it's like, here are some places that you can look for your answer. And if you are still stuck after a certain amount of time, then come ask.
One of those being Stack Overflow nowadays.
One of those being Stack Overflow. Yep.
So
bringing it all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, full circle.
So Stack Overflow, you can think of that as like a community version of the idea of talking over proposed solutions, right? So you can solve it yourself, or you could find 3 different people with 3 different proposed solutions and get them all to talk about it and like upvote each other's. And that's what Stack Overflow does at scale for the community. Sometimes it works amazingly well. Other times it doesn't work very well. It kind of depends on the knowledge level of the people contributing. But it is pretty cool that like we're like describing doing a thing. It's like, oh wait, that's what the thing we started talking about does. So, well, I think this was great. This was actually more interesting even than I thought it would be when jumping off from the Stack Overflow news as our kickoff topic. So I guess Lance and I are regulars, and Zachary and David are recurring guest hosts. So thanks to all for being here and doing this. Thanks to our handful of live viewers and our at least dozens, sometimes hundreds of afterwards viewers. One of the topics I want to talk about in a future one of these is what are the ways and places to best promote this? Because I've pointed it out like individually to people, they've been like, wow, and then they go watch it and they really like it. But, I don't think like the YouTube recommender algorithm is ever going to create any significant viewership for a hour to 2 hour nerds talking about tech stuff some pseudo podcast that doesn't seem like it's going to make the top of their ranking algorithm.
Yeah, that algorithm's a very harsh mistress. So.
Yeah, and I don't think we have what it takes to win the YouTube algorithm, but we should maybe ponder more ways to better promote.
Yeah, and we'd have to do something like have better thumbnails with really surprised faces, red arrows and circles on the thumbnail, and then like
think about hiring
top
somebody
10 ways to blow up your career or something
I'm
that.
I'm thinking about hiring somebody to thumbnail. Like I believe we have enough in-house talent to come up with real clickbaity titles. So I think we can internally workshop and write the 10 ways to blow up your career clickbait titles, and then maybe have somebody whose job is to thumbnail each one. Although I still don't know that would be enough to win the YouTube algorithm. But
We may not get a lot of return viewers depending upon the clickbait.
they may be disappointed. Wait, it was just like people having a somewhat, like thoughtful discussion on a topic. I don't come to YouTube for thoughtful discussions on topics. This is crazy. I want to see explosions and schemes and
Make it a reality show.
there we go. We can make it a reality show. Okay, well, I guess again, thanks again to our viewers, and we'll see everybody, and I'll see you gentlemen at work.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah.